Hello friends, welcome back to Dungeon Design in Zelda. So far in this series we've already looked at Ocarina of Time, Majora's Mask, The Wind Waker, and Skyward Sword. Something I've noticed while examining these games is the upward trend of stuff, or as I've called it, chores, that the game makes you do before getting to the first dungeon. Now I know, world building. That's the whole point of all this stuff, right? Seeing our protagonist in his normal daily life before throwing him into danger is all part of the classic hero's journey stuff, and is meant to get us invested in the world and the story. But are you gonna say that Ocarina of Time, Majora's Mask, and even games like Breath of the Wild are games that don't have world building? I hold strong onto my belief that you can have your cake and eat it too in this regard. And seriously, no way is herding goats and all of this stuff in the service of world building. But before we get into that, a few usual things to get out of the way. Twilight Princess was the best-selling Zelda game until Breath of the Wild, and I can certainly see why. Truthfully, when it came out, it fought valiantly for my own personal top spot of best Zelda game, and I've been excited to get into this one because of this. The game is widely known for having some of the series' best dungeons. I just wish it didn't take so long to get to them. The story is one of my favorites in the series, featuring one of my favorite designs for Link, and we also get one of my favorite companion characters in the series, Midna. Also dog. Truly, I think it's one of the most immersive experiences that the series has to offer, and in hindsight, it's kind of amazing just how much they managed to squeeze into this game. It's got a huge expansive overworld littered with secrets and collectibles, a long winding story, and 9 main dungeons, all of them being pretty lengthy. Looking at the other 3D Zelda games, Ocarina of Time also had 9 main dungeons, but the first 3 were quite short, and the other story stuff as well as the overworld wasn't nearly as expansive as this game. Majora's Mask had only 4 main dungeons, but they balanced that out with a lot of stuff outside of those dungeons. Wind Waker had a more troublesome development, meaning some dungeons had to be cut, leaving only 7 main dungeons. Skyward Sword, which came out 5 years after this game, also had only 7 main dungeons. But Twilight Princess here, 9 main dungeons. Loads of story, loads of secrets, a horse, a dog. Yeah, it's pretty much got it all. For the sake of these videos, I'm going to be playing the HD version on Wii U, which I believe to be the definitive version of the game for a few reasons, most of which just boil down to options. See, the game initially was a dual release on the GameCube and Wii. The Wii version flipped the entire map to make way for motion controls, meaning depending on which version of the game you had gotten at that time, your east and west may have been inverted. Twilight Princess HD on Wii U allows you to choose either version of the map by having the Wii's inverted map playable on hero mode. So you get your options between lefty or right-handed Link. You can also choose in the options between the GameCube's first-person aiming or the Wii's third-person aiming. I personally prefer the third-person aiming because I just find it quicker, plus you get this little targeting reticule. You also get to toggle on or off the motion controls for this aiming. Basically, all of the features of both the Wii and GameCube versions, with the exception of the waggle, are accounted for and present, and entirely optional. The final nail in the coffin for the other versions is the HUD. Just look at how cluttered this HUD is. And look at how much tidier it all looks in the HD version. Oh, I can actually see my surroundings! They also scaled down some of the more tedious sections of the game, in particular the Tears of Light segments, and added in a new mini dungeon as well as the Poe Lantern to make being a completionist that much easier. Oh, and the graphics are a bit better too. That's just a bonus. Actually though, something I've noticed is that a lot of people harp on Twilight Princess HD for not having as much work put into its graphics as Wind Waker HD. But if you look at the details, it's actually the opposite. Wind Waker HD's graphical improvements mainly come down to its lighting engine, using the same lighting engine as Breath of the Wild. Twilight Princess HD didn't do as much of a dramatic change with this lighting engine, but almost all of the textures in this game got completely redrawn, adding in huge amounts of detail to pretty much every surface. It's one of those cases of the game looking as good as you remember it, but when you actually go back to compare them side by side, the difference is far more dramatic. So Wind Waker's big change is far more noticeable at a glance, but Twilight Princess had a lot more work put into its finer details. Just a note about this version of Link as well. He certainly feels less less quick and nimble than his Wind Waker counterpart, with motions that just feel more weighted. The game's use of rumble, as well as his overall speed, just makes every attack feel like he's putting a great deal of strength into it. Just in general, Twilight Princess Link seems to be an absolute beast of a character who can brute force his way through most problems. I mean, to be able to halt a charging goat in its tracks like this would take a great deal of strength, and his more rigid movements, rather than the quick and fluid motions from Wind Waker, really sets this character apart from that one, which is especially interesting since Twilight Princess actually ran on the same engine as Wind Waker. But one of the best additions to this version of Link is that our boy here can swing his sword while running. Seriously, why can't any other Zelda game let us do this? It makes combing through swaths of grass so much easier and just feels so natural. There's a ton of other little flares added here and there that just makes this version of Link so cool, like the way he sort of twirls his sword while idly facing an enemy, and of course the way he sheathes his sword after defeating certain enemies. Like, now you're just showing off. Oh, but it's really cool. For this playthrough, I actually decided not to play on hero mode this time around, reason being that I wanted the canon version of the map for these videos rather than the Wii's inverted version. Also, a tiny overlooked feature that I love about Twilight Princess is that you start with your horse Epona right from the get-go, and you even get to name your horse. I named my horse Jebby. So just like my criticisms of Skyward Sword, Twilight Princess takes a good long while to get going when you start a new file. So just like before, we'll have to summarize or we'll be here even longer. We get a good look at Link's daily home life working at Ordon Ranch, which is located in Ordon Village in the Ordon province. You could say that Link leads an ordinary life. Okay, hey, calm down. Russell, a good friend of Link, has been tasked with delivering a gift to the royal family of Hyrule the day after tomorrow, but requests that Link go in his stead. We get some nice scenery, then this guy Fado calls for Link, asking to help on the ranch, and yep, we're already herding goats. Gameplay. We also meet these kids, Tallow, Mallow, Beth, and Colin. Tallow is an absolute brat, Beth clearly is crushing on Link, which is frankly inappropriate, Mallow is too powerful, and Colin is the shy kid that sorta gets bullied by the rest. So these kids ask you to buy them a slingshot from the shop. But the shop owner won't sell it to you because she's too distracted about her cat being missing. But also Colin made you a fishing rod, but his mom won't give it to you because she's distracted about her bassinet being stolen by monkeys. So you gotta get the bassinet so you can get the fishing rod so you can catch a fish so that the cat can steal it so that you can go to the shop and buy the slingshot. Assuming you bothered to collect enough money along the way, which should be easy to do. Then these kids force you through this rather intrusive tutorial on using the slingshot, the only enjoyable part of which is killing the spider. Then Russell drops off a wooden sword at your house and the kids force you into another intrusive tutorial, this time on how to use the sword. Good grief, kids. Then they go chasing a monkey in the forest and you've got to follow after them, which is where the game gets exciting as you venture deep into the Faron Woods, get a lantern from this guy, and have to battle some minor enemies such as Keese, Dekubabas, and even Bokoblins, who are at their ugliest in this game. We rescue Tallow and that monkey, and with all of that excitement out of the way, we're right back to herding goats again. Personally, I find that rescue segment to be pretty fun. Even this early on, there's some classic Zelda elements, such as needing to find the key for this locked door, and even finding a piece of heart. But bookending this with forced goat herding, which is something that really should just be relegated to an optional minigame, is part of what ruins this experience for me. Though at least we get to do this, which is pretty fun. Heave! With our second round of goat herding done, it's time for our delivery errand to Hyrule. But our friend Ilya here will get mad at us for apparently injuring our horse and takes Jebby away to the local spring. These kids will get bratty and in our face and only let us by if we lend them our sword. And yeah, I know it's made of wood, but why are you giving a sword to children? Then, when we reach the spring where Ilya has taken our horse, all hell breaks loose. A party of Bulblins smashes through, gives Link a bonk on the head, kidnaps the kids, and then they peace out. Link will come too, but when he tries to pursue them, he comes face to face with a wall of Twilight. A monstrous hand pulls Link through, and we get this grueling cutscene as Link is transformed into his wolf form for the first time and then dragged off. And no, we're still not at the dungeon yet, but things are sure getting interesting. We come to locked in this prison and meet Midna, who will be our companion character throughout the game. Midna agrees to free us, but says she'll need our help with something in return. We have this lengthy section as we escape from this prison, only to find ourselves at Hyrule Castle. We meet Zelda herself and learn about Zant invading Hyrule and shrouding the world in Twilight, which transforms all of the inhabitants into spirits. Then Midna takes us back to Ordon so we can gather a new sword and shield, which we can get by robbing our neighbors' houses. We'll head back to Faron Woods and meet the light spirit Faron, who we need to help recover his stolen light by killing all these little insect things. Once all of the tears of light are collected, the veil of Twilight will be lifted from this area, and we'll be back in our Hylian form, but with this swanky new outfit, which apparently belonged to an ancient hero. Shameless plug, but I've got a theory about that, by the way. But moving on. Faron will tell us that we need to match Zant's power, and that we're the chosen hero, and all that good stuff. The power we need to obtain can be found in the temples around Hyrule, with the first one being here in Faron Woods. This just so happens to be the same relic that Midna is after, rather conveniently. One last thing to note is that we'll encounter this golden wolf, who turns out to be the hero's shade, and teaches us the first hidden skill, the ending blow, which is a great finishing attack, though it seems like Link always goes directly for the crotch when pulling off this attack, which I suppose is effective. So now we can head through the woods again, and we'll finally find ourselves able to enter the dungeon.
You steal from me.
Welcome to the Forest Temple, which shares its name with the Forest Temple of Ocarina of Time, but is without a doubt not the same location. Of all these starter dungeons that we've looked at so far, this is easily the longest and most complex of them all. But I'm okay with that considering how long it takes simply to get here. The Forest Temple also is perhaps the most guided experience inside of a dungeon in this game. These monkeys are all throughout the place, giving us a clear objective since they need to be rescued, and also providing us with some guidance showing us where to go, as they'll often beckon Link to follow them. I'm fine with this, as it's the game's first dungeon, and we don't really see that sort of hand-holding in the dungeons after this. The Forest Temple is built into several large, hollowed-out trees, really leaning into that forest theme. This dungeon really impresses me as a showcase of just how detailed the textures in this game really are, with all of the structures here made of wood, with symbols depicting a variety of magic, wind, trees, and typical Zelda swirling patterns all over the place. Most notably is the Kokiri symbol painted on all of the doors, and hold on, this is starting to feel familiar. There's nothing confirmed about who built the Forest Temple, so we will need to step into theory territory for a bit. It's not a stretch to see the similarities between the Forest Temple here and the Forbidden Woods from Wind Waker. Both take place in hollowed out trees, both heavily feature wind-powered rotor switches and mechanisms, and both feature the Kokiri symbol painted on all of the doors, with no Kokiri in sight. Given that Wind Waker and Twilight Princess are actually games that run parallel, taking place roughly around the same time, but in different timelines, this strengthens the theory. Back in Wind Waker, the King of Red Lions also told us that the Forbidden Woods and Forest Haven were once one much larger area, with what he described as throngs of lush forests. And if we look at the way the Forest Haven and Forbidden Woods were separated by a huge gap, a chasm, if you will, and now at this huge chasm in the middle of the Forest Temple, separating these two massive trees surrounded by dense woods on all sides, it all seems to fall into place. Obviously, the layouts are not one-to-one, with the Forbidden Woods having a largely vertical design and the Forest Temple being mostly on a single floor. But the fine details of geography in Zelda are really rarely consistent, rather only being consistent in broad strokes. Couple this with the fact that both feature very similar bosses and both have the boomerang as the dungeon item, then it's a safe bet that they're possibly the same location in different timelines, or if not, have similar origins. See, the issue with this theory is, in my opinion, the name of the dungeon itself. Zelda games have pretty deliberate naming schemes, being selective about which dungeons are labeled as temples and which aren't. The game's second dungeon, for example, isn't the Fire Temple, it's the Goron Mines, and the Forbidden Woods in Wind Waker, which seem to be the old homes of the Kokiri, isn't called the Forest Temple either. So if this place was the same location, it shouldn't be called the Forest Temple, but it is. So the most likely scenario in my mind is that this location just has similar origins, or was possibly built by the Kokiri race as an actual temple, which is why the dungeon shares many features with the Forbidden Woods, another Kokiri-built area. But it may not be the exact same location. The other issue here is that the Deku Tree is nowhere to be seen. Yes, he did die in Ocarina of Time during the child portion of that game, and in the adult timeline, which would lead into Wind Waker, the Deku Tree sprout would grow to take his place. But that doesn't mean that the Deku Tree sprout wouldn't grow in this timeline, since in Ocarina of Time, it was the curse on that game's Forest Temple that prevented him from growing. A curse that simply wouldn't have occurred in this timeline. So it's safe to say he's still around, just not seen in-game. So that's my belief. Both locations built by Kokiri, but serving different functions. This place must have been a significant location for the child tribe, but not their old homes, serving as some sort of temple instead. The strong wind theme also ties this to the Kokiri further, as wind symbolism has always had a strong connection to the tribe, with the old wind sage in Wind Waker having been a Kokiri himself. Though this is not the wind temple, don't get me wrong here, but wind is certainly going to be a significant element here. We even see strong gusts of wind powering these propeller-based bridges in this great chasm here. The architecture of the Forest Temple is pretty cool. Most of the rooms here have pretty natural influences, which makes sense, but there are totem poles littered throughout the dungeon's many rooms, as well as many man-made wooden constructs, such as these platforms, scaffolding, and even staircases, some built with wooden planks, and some just carved into the wood of the trees themselves. But most importantly, the wind-controlled mechanisms. Of all of the forest-themed dungeons in the series, this is probably the one that captures that forest theme best, with massive tree rings, enormous foliage, and overgrowth everywhere. I love it. The dungeon's music is where it falls a bit short for me. It goes all in on ambience and certainly fits the theme of Forest Dungeon, but it feels so forgettable in my opinion. I can never just hum it in my head. It's kind of surprising because Twilight Princess as a whole has a fantastic and thematic soundtrack with some of the series' best and most memorable pieces of music, but this one isn't among those. It gets the job done well enough, featuring tribal-like percussion and what sounds to me like a xylophone making up the theme's backbone, with some more ominous tones played over it. Curiously, there is this short section where the drums stop, giving way to a short tune to play. This tune feels familiar to me, but I can't quite place it. All I can think of is that it somewhat reminds me of the short tunes played by the Skull Kids in Ocarina of Time during this side quest, which plays out in a call and response fashion. But if I'm recalling correctly, that minigame features randomly generated songs. Even still, it could be a reference to it, as the short tune begins with a few notes and then repeats a few times, adding more notes as it goes, which just happens to be exactly the format of how that minigame is played. Other than that short curiosity, the track is fairly bare bones, but it's a perfectly serviceable piece. Alright, let's talk about the progression through this place. We'll begin in this foyer room where we'll be introduced to a few important dungeon mechanics, such as rolling going into these totem poles to knock off the pots that are on top of them. We'll find that same monkey from before locked up, so we can defeat the bokoblin here and free her. She'll beckon for us to follow her to the door, but before you do, you can nab an optional chest found on the side of the room with some cash. Also, be sure to use your slingshot to get rid of the Walchillas on the vines here before you go to climb up. This will take us into what I'll call the dungeon's main central room. We'll see a raised platform in the center of the room and a door in each cardinal direction, including the one we just came in through. But before you take all that in, we'll be introduced to this game's version of a Skulltula, an enemy that just happens to be at its scariest in this game. Just the size of them and how they move, and ugh, I hate it. Luckily, they aren't too difficult to dispatch. Just go in with a few stabs and then you'll be able to use a fatal blow to finish them off quickly. If we look around the room a bit more, we'll find these bomblings, which will basically act like this game's version of bomb flowers, except more gross because they're also spiders. But we can get some use out of them right away, as there's a bombable wall here where we'll find an optional chest with some more cash. If we head up onto the central platform, we'll see that all 3 of the doors before us are out of reach, but there's a pretty straightforward Zelda puzzle here. Simply light all the torches using your lantern, and these stairs will rise up to lead you straight ahead to the northern door. Before you go into the door, make sure to open this chest right here to get yourself the dungeon map. Nice and early. Now heading through the door, we'll find ourselves in what I'll call the huge canyon room, though it's more like a gap between these 2 enormous tree sections of the dungeon. The monkey will start to lead you across the bridge, but then another monkey will appear, toss a boomerang, and destroy the bridge, halting your progress. All you can do now is head back through the door you just came through, and the monkey will beckon you to follow again. She'll help you swing across the gap, and you can head into the eastern door. The path branches here. If we head down the hallway to the left, we'll find a bombling and a destructible wall, behind which we'll find Uku. Oh good god, I almost forgot about Uku. This hideous creature will allow you to warp out of the dungeon if needed, but mostly, it's just hideous. Link's expression here says it all. If we head right down the hallway, we'll come into this flooded room. The monkey will lead you across the bridges to the other end of the room. Just watch out for the spiders. The door the monkey wants us to go into is locked, however, so we can head through the other door in this room instead. This takes us into a different section of that huge open canyon, which has a wind-powered bridge, which we can cross when it rotates. Head through the next door and we'll end up in this room, which has another rotating bridge, but there's no wind in here to turn it, so it's a dead end. However, there is a chest here with that key we needed, so we can grab it and head straight back to that locked door we couldn't open in the previous room. Spending that key takes us into this open room where another monkey is trapped. We can roll into the totem pole a couple of times and the cage will topple and break, freeing the monkey. A couple of bokoblins will appear, but they're easy to defeat. There's another optional chest with cash here, but otherwise we can follow the monkeys back into the previous room. Before we head into the central room, there's a couple of details to note about this flooded room. The boss key is here, but it's behind a gate that we can't open just yet, so just keep it in mind for later. There's also an alcove with a chest here, which contains a Miiverse stamp, so you can post to Miiverse, but oh right. Rest in peace, Miiverse. Rest in peace. Back in the central room, the monkeys will help you swing across the room and over to the western door. The western room has a few Dekubabas and a pair of these new enemies called Deku-likes, which seem to be the unholy love child of a like and Dekubaba. You can kill them by tossing bomblings into their mouths. If we head up the stairs, we'll actually find 3 more doors, with no clear discernible order of which to go through first. But if you head into the northern door, you won't be able to make progress there because of these 2 rotating bridges which won't line up. So instead, let's tackle the other 2 for now. The western door is blocked by a bombable rock, which you can blow up with a bombling. In this room is another trapped monkey. You can knock the chest off this totem pole to get the key, then light these torches to raise the stairs up, and spend that key here to free him. The southern door takes us into this round room, where we'll have to fight this big Dekubaba, which seems to be growing out of a Deku-like. It has the the key to this monkey's cell, which it swallows. He's pretty easy to kill as well. Just slap his face around a bit to kill the Deku Baba part, then toss a bombling into the Deku like to kill it, and get yourself the key to the monkey's cell. Once you've freed both monkeys, we can start heading back to the central room. Just make sure to toss a bombling into this Deku like's mouth so you can get this chest behind it for a piece of heart. Now the 4 monkeys that we've rescued will lead us back to that canyon section through the northern door of the central room where that bridge was destroyed before. The 4 of them will help you swing across the canyon so that we can reach that door. This takes us to the dungeon's mid-boss fight. The monkey that cut the bridge before returns and attacks us with his boomerang, as well as cutting the Deku Babas off of the ceiling. His name is Ook, and he's fairly simple to defeat. When he throws his boomerang, roll into the totem pole that he's on top of, which will cause him to lose balance and fail to catch his boomerang. He'll be knocked down and open to attack. Slap his butt a few times, rinse, repeat, and he'll go down. As it turns out, this gross insect was on his face, corrupting him, and with it dropped off, he'll flee in embarrassment. Just as a side note, but regarding the mid-boss music here, it seems pretty bare bones at first, and then it breaks out into a total jam of a song all of a sudden. I unapologetically love it. This earns us the dungeon item. We'll acquire his boomerang, known as the Gale Boomerang, which is revealed to house a spirit, the Fairy of Winds. The Gale Boomerang is a pretty great item. It retains the Wind Waker Boomerang's ability of locking onto multiple targets. It can also be thrown quickly with a tap of the button or aimed manually by holding down the button. Also, like previous boomerangs, it retains its ability to fetch and retrieve items for you. It's a nice, versatile item, which is going to be most useful for puzzle solving, since it creates a little tornado when thrown. In typical Zelda fashion, we'll be locked in the room, forcing us to use the item to get out. In this case, there's one of those rotor switches above the door, which you'll need to activate a few times to open the door. Now back in the open canyon, the monkeys will be gone, but there's another path if you hang a right. We can now use the power of wind with the boomerang to turn these bridges and cross. We'll find yet another monkey here, who we can free by using the boomerang to cut the ropes suspending his cage. Now we can turn these 2 bridges and head through the door, and we'll actually emerge in that western room from the northern door that we saw earlier, which is just where we need to be. For one thing, there was an optional chest in this side room earlier, which we can now get with the boomerang by extinguishing these torches. This earns us another heart piece, so it's well worth the short detour. Now we can loop back to the central room and get that chest that's suspended from the ceiling here, which has been teasing us since the start of the dungeon. This gets us the compass. Now that we have this, we can see where any remaining chests are, as well as where the boss is, and the remaining monkeys that need to be rescued. While we're here, we'll also need to duck back into the eastern room and use the boomerang on these propellers to open this gate and get ourselves the boss key, which was also teased to us earlier. Now we'll want to head towards the boss room, which, if you look at the map, is found directly north of where we got the boss key. So head through that northern door and a monkey will beckon you further through the next door. We'll be back in that room with the rotating bridge, which has 3 more doors. Now we can actually use the bridge, and if we follow the monkey into the next room, which is directly north, we'll find ourselves in this large open room which has the boss door. There's a convenient amount of fungi platforms here, which show how many monkeys are left to rescue. And checking the map, we can see there's one in a side room from here, as well as 2 more accessible from that previous room. The first one I suggest going for is the one in the side room from here. We can rotate these bridges and climb this vine wall to reach the door and head through. This room has a pretty neat puzzle. We'll need to use the boomerang to fetch the bombling here and use it to blow up the rock blocking our path. Then again blow up the rock that the monkey is trapped behind. While you're in here, also make sure to kill the Deku-like and open this chest for a small key. That key being the reason I recommend doing this room first. Now we can backtrack to the rotating bridge room and rotate it so we can access the 2 side rooms. It doesn't matter which order to do these 2 rooms in, but if we go west first, we can free this monkey by dropping down the correct hole in the floor to the room below. Just watch out for the spiders. Then if we head east, Next, we can spend that small key to unlock the door. There's a short tunnel here, then a vine wall to climb, and we'll find the monkey trapped behind a gate, which we can open by using the boomerang on the 2 propellers here. There's also another optional chest here with another Miiverse stamp if you want it. That's all the monkeys freed now, so if we head back to the boss door room, the monkeys will all string themselves together to create a huge monkey rope, so we can swing across the gap here and head into the boss room.
Triple champion.
We'll find the room empty, except for a poisoned spring of water. But it won't be long before the boss reveals itself, a pair of massive Dekubabas known as Diababa. Simply use the boomerang to feed a bombling to each mouth, and the fight is over. Alright, just kidding, this only makes it mad, and the boss then reveals itself for real. The 2 massive babas were only limbs on an even larger creature. This is Diababa for real. Visually, I think Diababa's design is a perfect fit for this game's art style, and in particular for this temple. It's a massive carnivorous plant, and its design is almost like an extension of the enemies we've been fighting up until now. And he's just so big and ugly. At this point, Ook, the monkey we battled earlier, will actually show up to assist in the fight by providing bombings for us to use. Stuff a bombling in one of the side mouths, then hit him in the eye with a bombling to stun him, then attack with your sword. Now, this all seems like a pretty tropey, stereotypical Zelda boss, the likes of which I've complained about extensively in the past. Yet, I don't mind this about Diababa. If it were as simple as just hitting his eye with the boomerang, sure, I'd probably gripe a bit about it. But because we have to use the boomerang in a more creative way by fetching bombings, then expanding on that by having the bombling moving, plus having the boss psych us out by not even revealing itself right away, it feels like the battle is scaling in difficulty. Sure, using the item to stun the boss so that we can go in with our sword and attack its very obvious eyeball weak spot is very tired and cliche by this point, but at least they put a twist on it. Diababa employs a few basic attacks, mostly just spitting this acid at you, but as long as you're far enough away, you don't have to try too hard to avoid it. All in all, this is a very easy boss, but this is also the game's first boss, so I don't mind. It's far more about this beastly spectacle and getting you used to the mechanics of the game than it is about challenge, and I'm cool with that. Sometimes we need something easy to lay the groundwork for better things later. So, not my favorite boss, but I don't mind it either. Once Diababa is defeated, he explodes in a pretty dramatic fashion. We'll get our heart container, and Midna will find what she was after, the fused shadow, which was that forbidden power the light spirits warned us about. With that, we'll be warped out of the dungeon and urged towards the Elden province where the next light spirit can be found. So that's the dungeon. Overall, while the Forest Temple rarely comes to mind for me when thinking about my favorite dungeons in this game, replaying it for this video has sort of opened my eyes to how well designed it is. It starts out hand-holding you by having these monkeys guide you around, but then halfway through it lets go and lets you roam around and figure things out for yourself. Then when it needs you to backtrack and revisit rooms you've already been to, whether it be for optional secrets or mandatory things like the boss key, the layout of the dungeon itself works to funnel you back there. The dungeon features a lot of backtracking and crisscrossing the same few rooms, but it's almost unnoticeable because of how it guides you so subtly after the first half. I love how the rooms are all branching with small side rooms, but there's still a clear main path, and it feels like the dungeon just makes really effective use of its space here. No room is wasted. It also reminds me a bit of the sand ship from Skyward Sword in the way that it strings you through nearly the entire dungeon once to get you acquainted with the layout, then lets you go through it properly again to clean house. The monkey business here isn't as intrusive as I expected either, making our objective of rescuing them not just enjoyable, but also have a payoff, as they help you access new areas in a way that's more integrated into the overall level design, rather than them just giving you a key or just giving you a hint and walking off. The progression here all just feels so natural, which is all the more suiting interesting, given that we're exploring the dungeon with the most natural setting. My only complaint might be that I wish the poison water scene in the boss room was more relevant to the rest of the dungeon. It seems like a callback to the poison swamp water that we see in Woodfall Temple back in Majora's Mask, but clearing the water in that dungeon had a noticeable effect on the rest of the dungeon, as well as the area outside of the dungeon. Here, not so much. If doing this cleared, say, the poison fog in Faron Woods, or something to that effect, it would have made our actions here feel like they had a bigger impact. But ultimately, that complaint feels rather minor, all things considered. Otherwise, the dungeon does a fantastic job balancing its tutorialization with its challenge and navigation, and even though the boss fight itself isn't that hard, we're just getting started with this game, so it gets a pass. Overall, I liked it a lot. Thank you so much for watching this video. I just wanted to take a quick second to say thank you to the lovely people who supported me on Patreon, as well as my channel members, particularly those who supported at the cheese level or higher, which includes Tetra, Brenda, Justin, Callie, Finley, Greymage, Hylian Historian, Gale, and Ethan3G. Thank you so much for the support, you guys, and I will catch you all next time. Bye-bye.